All right, so today we're going to dive into something that's, well, it's a bit of a modern mystery, isn't it? Ghosting.
Yeah.
We've all heard about it. Maybe some of us have even experienced it firsthand.
Oh, sure.
It's that sudden radio silence from someone you thought you were, well, you thought things were connecting with.
Right.
And it can leave you feeling a little bit lost, a little bit like you've wandered into some digital Bermuda Triangle, especially, when it comes to dating. But for this deep dive, we're going beyond just sharing ghost stories. You've sent over this really fascinating collection of sources. We've got articles from psychologists, mental health organizations, even a poet's reflections on this whole thing.
Oh, wow.
So today, what we want to do is unpack why this hurts so much, what's going on in the mind of the ghoster, and equally important, the person who's been ghosted.
Yeah.
And maybe come up with some ways to deal with this if you've been on the receiving end of this disappearing act. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating topic because it feels very much like a product of our very hyper-connected world.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it exposes these raw nerves about how we form relationships and maintain relationships, even offline.
So true. So maybe let's start with the emotional fallout. I think anyone who's been ghosted knows that feeling, the confusion, the self-doubt. You wonder, did I do something wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. Our brains crave patterns, right? We crave understanding.
Yeah.
And especially in relationships.
Yeah.
And ghosting throws a wrench in all of that.
Yeah.
Suddenly there's no explanation. There's no closure.
Right.
You're just left with a blank space where this connection used to be. And one of the sources that you sent, Blow Me Mind Press, I thought it was so interesting. They liken the pain of ghosting to physical pain.
Oh, wow.
And they even cite studies showing that social rejection activates some of the same brain areas.
So it's more than just hurt feelings. It's like our brain's processing it like a real injury.
Exactly. And without that closure, like I was saying, it's like you're left in this emotional limbo.
Right.
And Centric Mental Health, that was another source that you sent,
right,
really emphasized how this lack of closure leads to rumination. Like overanalyzing.
Yeah.
And you just go down this spiral of negative thoughts.
And it can really affect your confidence in future interactions, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Which actually brings us to this point that surprised me. It's called ghostophobia.
Oh, wow.
Which is like the actual fear of being ghosted.
Yeah.
It was a term I had never heard before reading this article from the National Council for Hypnotherapy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It makes sense, though. Because those past experiences, if you've been ghosted, it can create this hypervigilance in future relationships. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to open up or trust.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Totally.
The fear of it makes it harder to form genuine connections in the first place. Okay, so we know it hurts.
Yeah.
But the big question, why do people do it?
Right.
Is it always, some sign of malicious intent, like they're trying to hurt you? Or is there, is there something more going on here?
I think it's rarely that straightforward.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are cases where it's a deliberate desire to hurt or manipulate, right?
Yeah.
But I think more often it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah.
And Blooming Mind Press, that source you sent,
they
actually dive into some pretty interesting psychological theories.
Okay.
So, for example, people with what's called an avoidant attachment style, they prioritize independence.
Yeah.
They fear intimacy.
So like that friend who always needs like a ton of me time.
Exactly.
Or just taken to the extreme.
Yeah, taken to the extreme. And for them, expressing that need for space can feel incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So instead of communicating directly, they retreat into silence.
Right. So it's almost like a form of self-preservation?
Yeah, it is. But unfortunately, at the expense of the other person's feelings,
Yeah, for sure. But there are also those times where it seems less about avoiding connection.
Yeah.
And more about, maybe a lack of consideration? I don't know if that's the right word.
Right.
But Professor Royett T. Dunbar, his research on college students was so interesting.
Yeah, what did he say?
The most common reason for ghosting. They just found the conversation boring.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that wild?
That's really interesting. It makes you wonder, right? Is there a connection between ghosting and just like our fast-paced digital culture?
Yeah.
We're bombarded with options. And maybe genuine connection has become, I don't know, almost disposable.
Disposable is kind of a harsh word.
It is.
But it does feel accurate sometimes, doesn't it?
It does.
It's swipe left, swipe right, ghost, and then, repeat.
Exactly.
But Professor Dunbar's work also delves into, the influence of hookup culture.
Right.
where ghosting after a sexual encounter has almost become this like unspoken rule.
It's like this unspoken agreement.
Yeah, yeah.
And it creates this emotional detachment.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to form those deeper connections.
Yeah. Blooming Mind Press also explored some other angles too, like the self-determination theory.
Oh, what?
Which suggests that people ghost to kind of regain control when they're feeling overwhelmed emotionally.
Oh, interesting. So almost like if things are moving too fast.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
they feel pressured, it's like their emergency exit.
Exactly, yeah. Like
Well.
pulling the fire alarm on a relationship that feels like it's burning out of control.
Yeah, I like that.
Then there's the cognitive load theory. This one's interesting.
Okay.
It suggests that people might ghost simply because they have so much going on mentally.
They're just overloaded.
Like they're juggling so many things, work, family, social obligations.
That's all too much.
And so responding to a message feels like just one more thing to add to that very full plate.
Yeah. So it's less about like an active choice and more of a reflex.
Yeah.
Just to avoid adding more to their plate.
Exactly. So, okay, we're seeing the why of ghosting can be pretty multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's about self-preservation. Sometimes it's about feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But what about those cases where it does feel really intentional, even cruel?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
I think that's where maybe the darker side of psychology comes in a little bit.
Oh, okay.
The National Council for Hypnotherapy, in their article,
Yeah.
they talked about what's called the dark triad of personality traits.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, have you?
I have, yeah. Fill me in, though.
So it's narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Oh, wow. Those are some big terms.
They are, yeah.
So does that mean some ghosters are, like, intentionally using silence as a weapon?
Well, it's certainly possible.
No,
But
right.
people with these traits, they often lack empathy.
Right.
They view other people as tools to be used for their own benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So ghosting, for them, it's like a convenient way to discard someone they no longer find useful.
Interesting. It's like they're playing a game where they make the rules and everyone else is just trying to figure out, like, what those rules even are.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
But even without those kind of extreme personality types, it seems like just a lack of communication skills or even, a fear of those difficult conversations plays a role.
For sure.
I think Centric Mental Health and Professor Dunbar's research, they both kind of touched on that.
They did, yeah. For some people, ghosting is just an avoidance tactic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to avoid uncomfortable confrontation. It's just easier to disappear than to have that awkward or emotionally charged conversation.
So, yeah, it's kind of the easy way out for the ghoster.
Right.
But it creates a much harder experience for the person on the other side.
Exactly.
Okay, so understanding these motivations, we've gone through a lot of them, is super important.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a second.
Okay.
And I want to speak directly to the listener who's actually been ghosted.
Yeah.
Because it can feel so isolating and painful. What do you say to them?
Well, first of all, it's really important to validate those feelings, right?
Yeah.
It's okay to feel hurt, confused, even angry. These are normal reactions to being ghosted.
Yeah.
But there are ways to navigate those emotions and move forward.
Okay, I want to hear about those because I know our listener, is eager for some advice here. So what are some tangible steps they can take to heal and just reclaim that sense of self?
Well, the National Council for Hypnotherapy,
Yeah.
they offer some great starting points.
Okay.
And one of them is so simple yet powerful. They say just recognize that no response is a response.
Okay.
As frustrating as that silence is, it's the ghoster, in their own way, communicating their inability or unwillingness to engage.
Yeah. It's like a backhanded way of saying, this isn't working for me, but without the courage to actually say it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they build on that with their next point, which is about reframing the experience. Instead of blaming yourself or thinking you did something wrong, try to see it as the ghoster's issue.
Right.
Their lack of communication reflects on them, not you.
Yeah. It's such a good reminder that we can't control how other people behave, but we can control how we react.
Exactly.
Because it's so easy to internalize that rejection, start questioning your own worth.
Yeah. And that's why their advice on avoiding generalizations is so important.
Okay.
Just because one person ghosted doesn't mean everyone will.
Yeah.
Each relationship is unique, and not everyone handles things in such an immature way.
Right. It's like a reality check. Otherwise, you could easily spiral and think, well, I'm just destined to be ghosted forever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they also talk about setting boundaries, which is something, we hear a lot about these days.
We do.
But how does that apply specifically to, this ghosting situation?
Well, I think it's about recognizing that you deserve respectful communication.
Yeah.
And ghosting falls short of that. So setting boundaries might mean choosing to disengage completely from the ghoster.
Right.
Block their number, unfollow them on social media, whatever you need to do to protect your emotional space.
It's almost like creating this protective bubble around yourself so you're not constantly triggered.
Exactly, yeah.
By their, presence or lack thereof.
Right. And it sends a clear message that their behavior is not acceptable.
All right.
Another important point they make is about recognizing emotional maturity, or rather the lack of it, because ghosting, I think, points to an inability to handle conflict constructively or express feelings directly.
So while it's tempting to maybe write ghosters off as, inconsiderate jerks, there might be something deeper going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they lack the emotional tools or self-awareness to navigate those challenging situations in a healthy way.
Okay, so we've got setting boundaries, understanding that ghosting reflects more on them than us, and then trying to see it through this lens of emotional maturity. That's helpful. What other advice did our sources offer for, navigating the aftermath?
Well, Blooming Mind Press had some great suggestions.
Yeah.
Especially around, shifting your focus back to your own life.
Okay.
They really emphasized staying busy, re-engaging with activities that bring you joy.
I love that.
Yeah. It's not about trying to forget the experience or, force yourself to get over it, but rather about filling your life with things that genuinely nourish you.
It's a powerful act of self-care.
It is.
Because, you're investing in yourself, you're doing things that make you happy.
Yeah.
And it reminds you that your joy doesn't depend on someone else.
Absolutely. And it's like that saying, the best revenge is a life well lived.
Right.
But
yeah.
I think, sometimes you need more than just distractions. Sometimes you have to process those emotions head on.
You do.
And that's where Blooming Mind Press offered some incredibly creative coping mechanisms.
Okay, let's hear it.
Specifically geared towards expressing and working through that emotional turmoil of ghosting.
I'm always up for creative expression. I once wrote a whole song about being ghosted.
Oh, wow. Well, maybe you'll find some inspiration in these suggestions.
Maybe.
One of them is to write a poem about the experience.
Oh, I love that. It's such a powerful way to channel, those emotions that are so complex into something tangible.
Yeah.
Something even beautiful.
Exactly. And you don't have to be a poet laureate to do it. It's just about using words as a tool for healing.
Right.
Expressing those feelings authentically without judgment. They even offered a prompt to get started. You've become a ghost, and I am lost in the silence.
Wow, that's potent. It really captures that disorientation and that sense of abandonment.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And it really speaks to the power of poetry to make sense of things that are often overwhelming or even unspeakable.
Okay, poetry's on the list. What other creative avenues did they suggest?
Another interesting suggestion was to create a fictional character based on yourself who's just been ghosted.
So turning your pain into art, basically.
I
like it.
Yeah, you're taking that raw experience. You're transforming it into a narrative that you can control, you can shape.
Right.
And in the process, you might gain some new insights into your own feelings, your own reactions.
It's like creating a safe space to explore those emotions, but with that layer of creative detachment.
Exactly. And they even offer a starting line for this exercise, they said. As she stayed at the unanswered messages, she felt.
Oh, so many possibilities.
It's
like a choose-your-own-adventure for healing.
Yeah, I like that.
We've been focusing on the individual experience here.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to, zoom out a bit because, as we've been saying, ghosting isn't just a personal problem, right? It feels like a symptom of some bigger societal trends.
Yeah, absolutely. Hannah Blum, she's the author of the Blooming Mind Press article.
Yeah.
And she hinted at this. She talked about how ghosting might be linked to, our fear of vulnerability in a culture that constantly pushes us to project this image of perfection.
It's like we're all trying to curate these flawless online personas.
Yeah.
And it makes it even scarier to show our true selves.
Yeah.
Flaws and all.
And that fear of vulnerability makes ghosting even more appealing.
Yeah.
It's easier to just disappear than to risk being rejected or judged for being less than perfect.
But if we're always seeking that validation from, external sources like social media or even the ghoster themselves, then it's just like we're setting ourselves up for a really shaky foundation.
Absolutely. And Hannah Blum said it so well. She said, perhaps we've been ghosting ourselves, abandoning the parts of us that need healing and searching for it in others.
That's deep.
Yeah.
So in a way, are we kind of contributing to this culture of ghosting by like neglecting our own needs?
Potentially.
And then seeking fulfillment externally?
It is possible. I mean, when we ignore our inner voice, when we numb our emotions or try to fit into somebody else's mold, we are essentially ghosting those essential parts of ourselves.
It's almost like we're outsourcing our happiness.
Yeah.
Instead of, cultivating it from within.
Exactly.
So the big question is, how do we break free from that cycle?
Right.
How do we start unghosting ourselves and creating that stronger sense of self?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness.
Okay.
It's paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our needs, and doing it without judgment.
Yeah.
And then it's about making choices that align with those needs.
Right.
Even if it means saying no, setting boundaries, or prioritizing our own well-being over, seeking that external validation.
It's almost like we have to become our own best friend, cheerleader, and therapist.
It all rolled into one.
But it's that self-love and that inner strength that ultimately makes us less susceptible to the sting of being ghosted, right?
It does. Because when we value ourselves,
Yeah.
we're less likely to tolerate being treated poorly.
Right.
And that could be ghosting or any other form of disrespect.
Yeah.
And we recognize that we deserve more. And we're willing to walk away from situations that don't align with our worth.
It's so empowering to realize that we have, maybe more control over our own happiness than we think.
We do.
But before we wrap up, this deep dive, I wanted to go back to something that really struck me in that Blooming Mind Press article.
Yeah.
Hannah Blum talked about how some of the pain of being ghosted might come from seeking validation from the ghoster rather than true love. That really got me thinking.
Yeah, it's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to this larger issue of how we view relationships.
Right.
If we're looking for someone else to complete us or validate our worth, we're setting ourselves up for, a pretty shaky foundation.
It's like trying to build a house on sand. It might look okay for a while, but it's going to crumble eventually.
Yeah. True fulfillment has to come from within.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating that strong sense of self-love and worthiness that's independent of our relationships.
So it's not about shutting down emotionally or avoiding relationships. It's about approaching them from a place of, wholeness and self-assurance.
Exactly. Recognizing that we are complete, worthy individuals.
Yeah.
Regardless of our relationship status. And that confidence, that self-awareness, it makes you more resilient. Not just when it comes to ghosting, but in all aspects of life.
It's like that Maya Angelou quote, "I am a phenomenal woman."
Yeah, I love that one.
We don't need someone to tell us that, we already know it.
Exactly. And I think that spirit of self-acceptance is key to navigating these complexities of modern relationships.
So as we resurface from, this deep dive into the world of ghosting, what are the key takeaways you hope our listener will kind of carry with them?
I think first and foremost, remember, ghosting is more about the ghoster than about you. Their inability to communicate or handle their emotions, it doesn't reflect on your worth as a person.
It's so easy to internalize that, but it really is their issue, not ours.
It is. And secondly, you have the power to heal and move forward.
Yeah.
Use those coping mechanisms we talked about.
Right.
Self-compassion, setting those boundaries, creative expression.
Yeah.
They can be incredibly powerful tools for reclaiming your sense of self.
And lastly, I think it's about challenging ourselves to create a culture of more open, honest, and compassionate communication.
Yeah.
Maybe ghosting will always be a part of, the digital dating landscape, but by raising our awareness and making those conscious choices, we can at least minimize its impact.
Right.
And foster those more genuine connections.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing we all deserve to be treated with respect and consideration.
Both online and offline.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for diving deep with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
We've covered a lot of ground,
Yeah.
from the emotional impact of ghosting to the psychology behind it. And of course, we talked about some incredible coping strategies.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating exploration.
Yeah.
And I hope our listener feels empowered to navigate these tricky waters with more confidence and resilience.
To our listener, remember, you are not alone in this experience. And more importantly, you are worthy of love, respect, and genuine connection. Until next time, keep exploring, keep your hearts open.
I love that. Keep your hearts open.
And we'll see you on our next deep dive.
Yeah, see you next time.
So we were just starting to get into some advice on, how to actually deal with being ghosted.
Right.
What did the National Council for Hypnotherapy have to say?
Well, one of the first things they say, and it's so simple, but it's really powerful, I think, is just to recognize that no response to the OK says. It might sound obvious, but it's true. That silence, as frustrating as it is, it's still a form of communication.
Right. It's like they're saying, this isn't working for me, but they just don't have the guts to actually say it.
Exactly. And their next point kind of builds on that. They say, try to reframe the experience.
Okay.
Don't blame yourself. Don't automatically think you did something wrong. See it as the ghoster's issue.
Okay.
Their inability to communicate, that says more about them than about you.
Right. It's so easy to fall into that trap of, self-blame.
It is, yeah.
But we can't control how other people behave, right?
Exactly. You can only control your own reaction.
But it's so easy to internalize that rejection and then start questioning your worth.
Yeah. And that's why their advice about avoiding generalizations is so important.
Okay, yeah.
Just because one person ghosted you doesn't mean that everyone will.
Right.
Don't let one bad experience define your whole outlook on relationships.
Yeah, it's so easy to get into that, I'm just going to be ghosted forever mentality. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just not true.
Yeah. Okay, so boundaries. I know they talked about setting boundaries too.
They did.
Which is, it's such a buzzword these days, right?
It is.
But how does that apply to ghosting?
Well, I think it's about recognizing that you deserve basic respect. You deserve communication.
Yeah.
And ghosting, that just completely disrespects that.
Yeah.
So setting boundaries might mean saying, okay, I'm done, I'm disengaging, block their number, unfollow them on social media.
So it's like creating a protective bubble.
Yeah.
Where you're not constantly being triggered.
Exactly. Protect your emotional space.
Yeah.
And it sends a message to them, too, that, hey, this behavior, not okay.
Right.
Another thing they talked about was recognizing emotional maturity.
Or the lack thereof.
Right. Because ghosting, it often points to an inability to deal with conflict, in a constructive way.
Right.
Or to even express their feelings directly.
Okay, so it's tempting to just write off all ghosters as inconsiderate jerks.
Yeah.
But it might be more complicated than that.
It usually is.
Yeah.
They might not have the emotional tools, or the self-awareness to handle these situations in a healthy way.
Okay, so we've got boundaries, understanding that it's more about them than us.
Right.
And this whole idea of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
That's helpful. What other wisdom did our sources offer for kind of navigating the aftermath?
Well, Blooming Mind Press, they had some good suggestions.
Okay.
Especially around shifting your focus back to your own life.
Okay. I like that.
They talked a lot about staying busy, doing things you enjoy.
Yeah.
It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about filling your life with things that actually nourish you.
Yeah. It's a powerful form of self-care.
It really is.
Yeah.
You invest in yourself. You do things that make you happy. You remember that your joy doesn't depend on someone else.
It's that whole, living well is the best revenge kind of thing.
Exactly.
But sometimes you need more than just distractions.
Of course.
You need to process those emotions.
Yeah.
Really deal with them head on.
Absolutely. And that's where Blooming Mind Press had some really creative coping techniques.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Specifically for expressing, working through the emotional turmoil of ghosting.
Oh, I like it.
I know you're big on creative expression.
I am.
You said you even wrote a song about being ghosted once.
I did. So what did they suggest?
Well, one suggestion was to write a poem about it.
Oh, I love that. It's such a good way to, get those feelings out,
It is. And it doesn't have to be, prize-winning poetry.
Right.
It's about using words as a tool for healing.
Yeah.
Expressing those feelings authentically, without judgment. They even had a prompt. They said, imagine starting with, you've become a ghost, and I am lost in the silence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's good. It really captures that feeling of, disorientation, abandonment.
It does.
Powerful stuff.
And it shows how poetry can help us make sense of these really difficult experiences.
Okay. So poetry's on the list.
Mm-hmm.
What other creative outlets did they suggest?
Another one was to create a fictional character based on yourself. And imagine they've just been ghosted.
Oh, interesting. So it's like turning your pain into art.
Exactly. You take that raw experience and make it into a story you can control.
Yeah.
And you might gain some new insights into your own feelings that way.
Yeah, it's like a safe space to explore those emotions.
Yeah.
But with this layer of creative detachment.
Exactly. And for this one, they had a starting line too. As she stared at the unanswered messages she felt.
Oh, the possibilities, like choose your own adventure, but for healing.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, so we've been focusing on the individual here, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we keep saying ghosting, it's not just a personal problem.
Right.
It feels like part of some bigger trends in society.
It does. And Anna Blum, she kind of alluded to this.
Okay.
She talked about how ghosting might be tied to this fear of vulnerability. You know, we live in a culture that's always pushing us to project this image of perfection.
Right. Everyone's curating these flawless online personas.
Exactly.
And it makes it so scary to show your real self, you know, with all your imperfections.
It does. And then ghosting becomes even more tempting.
Yeah.
It's just easier to disappear than risk rejection or judgment.
Right. But if we're always looking for validation from outside sources, you know, whether it's social media or the ghoster themselves, it's like we're building our house on a really shaky foundation.
We are. And Hannah Blum, she said it perfectly. She said, perhaps we've been ghosting ourselves, abandoning the parts of us that need healing and searching for it in others.
Wow. Right. So we're contributing to this ghosting culture by neglecting our own needs.
Possibly, yeah.
And looking for fulfillment outside of ourselves.
It's possible when we ignore that inner voice.
Yeah.
When we numb our emotions, try to fit into someone else's mold.
Right.
We're ghosting parts of ourselves.
It's like outsourcing our happiness instead of creating it ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we break free from that? How do we unghost ourselves, so to speak?
Well, I think it starts with self-awareness.
Yeah.
Paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, what we need.
Yeah.
And not judging ourselves for it.
Right.
And then it's about aligning our choices with those needs.
Okay.
Even if it means saying no, setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Putting our well-being first instead of chasing external validation.
It's like we have to become our own best friend and cheerleader.
Exactly.
And our own therapist all at the same time.
Exactly. Because it's that self-love and inner strength that makes us less vulnerable to being ghosted.
Right.
Because when we value ourselves, we don't tolerate being treated poorly.
Right.
Whether it's ghosting or anything else.
Yeah.
We know we deserve better.
Yeah.
And we're willing to walk away from those situations that don't reflect that.
Yeah. It really is empowering to realize we have more control, you know, over our own happiness than we think.
For sure.
But okay, before we wrap this whole thing up, I wanted to circle back to something in that Blooming Mind Press article that really stuck with me.
Okay.
Hannah Blum. She talked about how some of that pain from being ghosted, it might come from looking for validation from the ghoster.
Yeah.
Not really true love.
Right.
That really got me thinking.
Yeah. It's such a powerful insight. And it makes you think about relationships in general.
Yeah.
You know, if we're looking to someone else to complete us or to tell us we're worthy,
right,
then the foundation is just, it's shaky from the start.
Yeah. It's like we're trying to build a house on sand, you know?
Exactly.
It might look okay for a little bit, but eventually
it's going to fall apart.
It's going to crumble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Real fulfillment has to come from within.
Right.
You know, it's about that self-love, that feeling of being worthy. And that's independent of any relationship.
So it's not about shutting down like emotionally or avoiding relationships. It's about approaching them from a place of, I don't know, like wholeness.
Yeah, wholeness.
Yeah, and self-assurance.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know, it's realizing that we are complete.
Yeah.
We are worthy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what our relationship status is.
Right.
And then, you know, that confidence, that self-awareness, it makes you so much more resilient.
It does.
Not just with ghosting, but, you know, with everything in life.
Yeah. It's like that Maya Angelou quote, I am a phenomenal woman.
Yes. I know that. You know, we don't need anyone else to tell us that. We know it.
Exactly. And I think that self-acceptance, that's really the key to navigating all these, you know, the messiness of modern relationships.
So as we come up from this deep dive,
you know,
into this whole world of ghosting,
yeah,
what are like the main things you hope our listener will take away from this?
I think the biggest one is to remember that ghosting, it's more about them than it is about you.
Yeah.
Their communication issues, their inability to handle their emotions. It doesn't mean you're not worthy.
It's so easy to think that, though.
I know, it is.
But it's true.
It's their problem, not yours.
Exactly.
And then also, you have the power to move on, You have all those coping mechanisms we talked about.
Yeah.
Self-compassion, those boundaries, creative expression.
They can be so powerful.
They really can.
Yeah. For just like getting back that sense of self.
Absolutely.
And lastly, I think it's also about trying to create a culture where we're more open, we're more honest, more compassionate when it comes to communication.
Yeah.
Maybe ghosting will always be out there,
right,
especially, with online dating and everything.
Yeah.
But if we're more aware and we make those conscious choices, maybe we can at least, minimize the impact a little bit.
Right.
And try to build those connections that are more genuine.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that everyone deserves to be treated with respect.
Yeah.
With consideration.
Both online and offline.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been great.
We covered a lot today.
You did, yeah.
The emotional impact of all this, the psychology behind it. And of course, we had those great coping strategies.
Absolutely. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, it has.
I hope everyone listening feels a little more equipped to deal with this, with more confidence and resilience.
To our listener, you're not alone in this.
You're not.
And more importantly, you deserve love.
You do.
You deserve respect.
Yes.
And you deserve real connection.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep your hearts open.
Keep those hearts open. I love that.
And we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.
See you then.